The days drifted like soft grey clouds across her small apartment. Morning light would fall through the curtains, gentle and golden, but she barely noticed. She moved slowly, making tea, feeding the small canary she kept for company, sitting by the window to watch people pass. It was all the same. No one called, no one visited, and though she didn't expect much anymore, the sameness pressed down on her chest like quiet weight. She used to fill her mornings with purpose, work, caring for her husband, raising her children. Now those memories felt like scenes from another lifetime. Sometimes she'd whisper, "I'm still here, Lord." But for what? The clock would answer in steady ticks, the bird in soft chirps, but heaven seemed silent. She didn't know it yet, but God was listening, waiting for the moment when her question would become the seed of something holy. Outside her window, the seasons came and went, like pages in a book she no longer read. Leaves turned and fell, snow came and melted, flowers bloomed and died, all without her feeling part of it. Time moved, but she felt still, like a photograph fading in the background of life. She kept the same rhythm every day, because changing it felt pointless. The mornings came too quickly, the nights lasted too long. Sometimes she traced the wrinkles on her hands, whispering, "So much time has passed, and I have nothing left to give." There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet sadness. Her body was slowing, yes, but it was her spirit that felt heavy, as though every tick of the clock reminded her that her best years had already been spent. What she didn't see was that time itself was not her enemy. It was the stage on which God was about to show her that nothing is ever wasted when love still breathes in a heart. She asked it almost daily, not aloud, not as prayer, just as thought that rose and fell with her breath. What am I meant to do now? It came to her while washing dishes or staring at the empty chair across the table. It came in the middle of the night, when sleep avoided her. She tried to fill her days, reading, knitting, watching the news, but none of it eased the quiet ache inside her. Everything she did felt like passing time, not living it. Once, while watching the children from the building next door playing outside, she whispered, "I used to have a reason to wake up." And in that soft confession, heaven stirred, because the moment a soul admits its emptiness, God begins to fill it. Her question, so small, so human, was the beginning of his answer. There came a point when she stopped fighting the feeling. She stopped asking why, stopped waiting for change. Life became something to endure rather than embrace. She did her chores, she smiled politely when spoken to, and she told everyone she was fine. And maybe she was, fine in the way a candle is fine when it's nearly burned out. Each night, she would sit by her window and watch the lights turn off one by one in the apartments around her. When the last one went dark, she whispered, "Another day, Lord. Thank you, I suppose." It wasn't bitterness, just habit. But Jesus does not despise weary prayers. He gathers them tenderly, knowing they are still faith, quiet, bruised, trembling faith. And though she didn't see it, he was already weaving purpose back into her story. One slow, unseen thread at a time. Each morning she rose more slowly. Her joints ached, her back protested, and her hands trembled when she tried to pour tea. Even simple things, tying her apron, watering the small plant by the window, took effort. Her strength wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The will to do, to care, to try, had worn thin like an old fabric, frayed by time and use. Sometimes she caught herself staring at the wall, minutes passing unnoticed. Her mind wandered, half in the past, half in the blur of the present. She no longer planned, she only waited. But what was she waiting for? She didn't know, perhaps the end of things, or perhaps something she couldn't name. In her weakness, heaven saw readiness, the kind of emptiness that God fills best. Because when human strength fades, divine strength begins its quiet work. She still went to church. She had promised her late husband she would never stop. Every Sunday, she put on her plain coat and walked slowly to the chapel 2 blocks away. The bells rang softly, calling her as they always had. But inside, surrounded by familiar hymns and familiar faces, She felt unseen. Families sat together. Children whispered and giggled. Friends exchanged warm greetings. She sat quietly in the same pew, third from the back near the window, unnoticed, unneeded. During the prayers, she bowed her head and whispered, "Lord, I'm still here, though I don't know why." No thunder answered her. No fire descended. But as the sunlight fell across her hands clasped in prayer, something unseen rested there too, gentle, invisible, alive. She didn't realize it yet, but Jesus sat beside her every Sunday, sharing her silence, waiting to reveal that even a quiet life can hold divine purpose. Once a week, sometimes less, the phone rang. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" She smiled into the receiver, forcing cheer into her voice. "Oh, I'm fine, dear. Don't you worry about me." They asked about her health, her church, her neighbors, and before she could say much more, they were gone again. Calls ended quickly. Goodbyes came too soon. She never blamed them. She knew they loved her in their way. But when the line went silent, she stared at the phone a long while, as if it might speak again. "I'm proud of you," she would whisper softly, though no one heard. Then, quieter still, "I just wish someone still needed me." And heaven listened. For the one who had once needed a widow's faith, a poor man's bread, and a broken woman's tears, was preparing once more to show that every soul has purpose, even when the world forgets it. It was late, the air was cool, and the room dimly lit by the flicker of a candle. She sat by her bedside, hands folded, heart trembling. Her prayers had been routine for years, names, memories, silence, but that night something inside her shifted. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Lord, I feel like I'm lost. Please, show me what I'm meant to do." It wasn't a demand. It was surrender, the kind that only comes when pride has burned away and only longing remains. She sat there for a long while, listening. There was no voice, no light, no sign. But in the stillness, something stirred, small as breath, gentle as dawn. A quiet promise began to form in her spirit. "You are still part of my work. Wait, and I will show you." She didn't know it, but heaven had just answered. Purpose had already begun to move toward her, quietly, softly on its way. The following afternoon, she was sitting by the window as usual, when she heard a faint knock. It was the little boy from the apartment downstairs. His mother had asked if she could watch him for an hour while she ran to the pharmacy. For a moment, she almost said no. Her heart hesitated, unsure if she had the energy for company. But something in his eyes, trustful, innocent, made her nod. "Come in, dear," she said softly. He climbed onto the couch, clutching a toy car, and began to chatter about everything and nothing. His small laughter filled the room like sunlight after long rain. When his mother returned and thanked her, she smiled and said, "It was no trouble at all." But when the door closed, she sat in silence, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about the boy, not exactly. It was what his presence awakened in her, a quiet truth that perhaps her life still had room to give. She didn't realize it then, but that tiny hour, unnoticed by the world, was heaven's whisper, "You still matter." The next day, while dusting the shelf where her old Bible rested, she felt a sudden urge to open it. The pages were yellowed, the print faint, the spine worn with years of quiet searching. She opened it at random, and her eyes fell on a verse she had underlined decades ago. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope." She stared at the words, her breath catching. How many times had she read that verse before, and yet now it felt alive, like a message written just for this day, just for her. Her heart swelled. Tears welled up. Not of sadness, but of recognition. "I still have a future," she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. The verse didn't answer her question. It was the answer, a small divine reassurance that her story was not over yet. And for the first time in a long time, she whispered back to heaven, "Then show me, Lord. I'm ready." After that day, she began to sense something different. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't a vision or a sound. It was a presence, quiet, steady, constant. When she sat in her chair, she no longer felt alone. When she walked to the store, she felt as if someone walked beside her, unseen, yet deeply real. She began to speak to him softly throughout the day, not in formal prayer, but in conversation. "Thank you for the sunlight. Help me with this heaviness. Stay with me, Lord. Just stay." And every time she spoke, peace would settle, not around her, but within her. It wasn't comfort as she once imagined it. It was something deeper, companionship, the kind that doesn't need words or miracles, only presence. She had spent years thinking Jesus was far away, high in heaven. Now she began to realize he had been sitting beside her all along, waiting for her heart to notice the nearness of love. Purpose came quietly, disguised as kindness. It started when her neighbor, the same mother from before, knocked again. "Would you mind feeding the cat while I'm at work this week?" she asked. "Of course," she said with a smile. Each morning she would slip next door, feed the small grey cat, and sit for a few minutes in the sunlight that filled the kitchen. It was a simple task, nothing grand, but it filled her day with meaning. Soon after, another neighbor stopped by, asking for help writing a letter to her son overseas. She agreed gladly. Then came others, small favors, brief conversations, little gestures of care. And somehow, the house that once felt silent began to echo with the quiet rhythm of purpose. She wasn't preaching or teaching or leading. She was simply being, present, kind, steady. And somewhere deep within, she felt Jesus whisper, "This is what I made you for." The days began to take on a new rhythm, gentle but alive. Each errand, each small kindness became a thread, weaving color back into the fabric of her life. She found herself humming again as she walked down the hallway with a small basket of groceries for a neighbor. When she fed the cat or folded a blanket for an elderly friend, she caught herself smiling. There was no applause, no recognition, yet each act felt seen, deeply seen. She didn't fully understand it, but she sensed that every small gesture was being gathered somewhere higher, that her ordinary kindness had become holy in the hands of Jesus. Sometimes, as she sat in the evening light, she would whisper, "Lord, I don't do much, but I feel alive again." And in the stillness, the peace that answered was unmistakable, the quiet joy of heaven, rejoicing over a heart that had rediscovered the beauty of giving. It happened one afternoon when the young mother from downstairs knocked again. She looked tired, eyes red, baby crying in her arms. Without hesitation, the elderly woman took the child, rocking gently until he quieted. Tears welled in the young mother's eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she said softly. Those words settled in her heart like sunlight on cold skin. Without you. How long had it been since she'd heard someone say that? When the mother left, she sat for a while, holding the baby's faint scent in the air, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. I didn't know I could still matter." That day she realized something profound. Her worth had never been about what she did, but about who she was, a vessel of Christ's gentleness in a world too hurried to notice it. Her presence, her tenderness, her patience, they were her ministry. She met her in the park. The young woman sat crying on a bench, her face hidden in her hands. Without thinking, the elderly woman sat beside her and said softly, "Would you like to talk?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. Words poured out, heartbreak, fear, loneliness. She listened, not to fix, not to advise, just to listen. And when the girl finished, she took her hand gently and said, "You're not alone, dear. He still sees you." The girl wept again, this time softer, and whispered, "Thank you." As she walked home afterward, the old woman felt something blooming in her chest. Not pride, but peace. It struck her then. She hadn't just offered comfort. She had become the comfort she once begged for. Jesus had used her pain, her loneliness, her waiting, to shape her into someone who could hold others in their own. And for the first time she realized, this is my purpose. That night, she sat by the window again, but everything felt different. The same lamp glowed, the same shadows danced, but her heart was full. She thought about the people she'd helped, the neighbors, the mother, the girl in the park. each one a small thread, and she, somehow, the hands weaving them together. "Lord," she whispered, "all this time I thought I was waiting for something big, but you've been using me all along, haven't you?" A still peace filled the room, so soft it almost felt like an embrace. Her purpose had not been lost. It had simply changed shape. It was no longer about doing more, but about being love wherever love was needed. Her story wasn't about what she achieved, but about the quiet radiance that came when she let Jesus live through her. And that realization, humble, holy, simple, became the heartbeat of her final years. The aches and stiffness didn't leave her. Her hands still trembled sometimes, and climbing the stairs still took her breath. But something in her had changed. The heaviness of why had turned into the lightness of because. Because love is worth it. Because someone needs a gentle voice. Because life still has sacred corners to fill with kindness. She began to wake with quiet purpose, to pray for others by name, to write little notes of encouragement and slip them under doors, to bake small loaves of bread for those who had none. Each act, no matter how small, became an offering. Her weakness no longer discouraged her. It reminded her who was carrying her. Sometimes she laughed softly to herself and said, "So this is what purpose feels like. Steady, simple, and full of Him." Even in her frailty, her steps had become grace in motion. Her strength was no longer her own. It was the strength of Christ, moving gently through a willing soul. Purpose had opened her eyes to beauty again. She started noticing things she'd long overlooked. The way sunlight caught on the leaves outside her window, the sound of children's laughter below, the fragrance of bread baking in her oven. Each day became a prayer, not spoken, but lived. She would hum as she kneaded dough, smile as she watered her plants, whisper blessings over the street from her balcony. It wasn't busy joy, it was peaceful joy, the kind that comes when gratitude replaces hurry. One afternoon, as she sat sipping tea with a neighbor, she laughed, a full, unguarded laugh. The woman across from her smiled and said, "You seem so happy lately." She looked down, eyes shining. "I think I just stopped waiting to be useful," she said, and started being thankful instead. That evening, she whispered to Jesus, "You were my purpose all along." It came unexpectedly, a letter from the local church inviting her to share a few words about hope at a women's meeting. Her first instinct was to say no. "I'm not a speaker," she murmured, but a gentle nudge in her heart whispered, "You have lived what others still need to hear." So she went. Her hands trembled as she stood before them, a room of young mothers, widows, women weary from life. She didn't bring notes or quotes. She simply told her story, how she once felt forgotten, useless, unseen, until Jesus taught her that love itself is purpose. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, women began to weep, not from sadness, but from recognition. Later that night, alone at home, she whispered through tears, "Lord, you used even my emptiness." It was her final calling, not a platform, not applause, but a life poured out in quiet testimony. Her last days were serene. The faces she'd once helped now surrounded her, neighbors, children, friends. They came not out of duty, but out of love. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words were gentle and sure. "Don't look for purpose in grand things," she said one evening. "Find it in loving well, right where you are." When her time came, she closed her eyes peacefully, her hands resting on her open Bible. The verse underlined, there was the same one that had changed her life, "For I know the plans I have for you." And when she opened her eyes again, she saw Him. Jesus stood before her, radiant and smiling. He reached for her hand and said softly, "You did exactly what I asked. You loved as I love. That was your purpose all along." She wept, but her tears were joy, the joy of completion, the joy of being known. Her days on earth had been quiet, but in heaven's book her life shone bright, a story of purpose revealed through love.